Beneath the moon's unyielding gaze, a single tear froze on her cheek like a shard of forgotten starlight, capturing the essence of a life unraveling in the silent grip of winter's indifference. Ilara Voss had never truly belonged among the wolves of the Silverfang pack, her human hands too gentle for the savage rituals of fang and claw. Yet fate had woven her into their world through threads of necessity and quiet compassion. For months, she had served as a nurse in the shadowed corners of their mountain stronghold, mending the brutal aftermath of territorial skirmishes and the raw edges of transformations under the full moon. It was Thorn Blackwood, the Alpha King's only son, who had drawn her deepest into this alien realm. His body shattered from an ambush by a rival clan's warriors. His fevered form sprawled across the healer's furs, whispering pleas that echoed in her dreams long after. "Stay with me," he had begged one storm-lashed night, his voice a ragged thread amid the crackle of hearthfire, his golden eyes, flecked with the wildness of his heritage, locking onto hers with an intensity that stirred something primal and unspoken within her soul. In those delirium-fueled hours, as she daubed salves on his wounds and cooled his brow with snow-melted cloths, he had confessed fragments of his burdens, the weight of his father's ailing rule, the guilt gnawing at him for a youthful indiscretion that had sown seeds of discord in the pack. But dawn brought clarity to the elders, their lupine senses recoiling from her lack of fur and howl. She was an outsider, a human anomaly who had dared to touch their prince's sacred blood. With cold ceremony, they stripped her of the embroidered cloak that had granted her tentative passage, their growls a chorus of finality as they banished her into the howling maw of the northern wastes. The wind rose like a living beast, tearing at her threadbare garments and whipping snow into a blinding veil that stung her skin like 1,000 invisible needles. Ilara trudged onward, her boots sinking into drifts that reached her thighs, the metallic tang of frost on her tongue mingling with the salt of unshed tears. High above, the moon hung swollen and indifferent, its silver light casting long shadows across the jagged pines that clawed at the sky, their branches laden with ice like frozen accusations. She clutched the slender cord around her neck, where a small glass vial dangled, a simple necklace from her distant human village, now forever altered by flecks of Thorn's dried blood, congealed remnants from the night she had stanched his deepest gash. It pressed against her chest, a cold weight that seemed to pulse with the memory of his warmth, a symbol of the fragile trust she had nurtured in secrecy. What was strength, if not the quiet endurance of a heart forged in rejection's forge, choosing to press forward when every instinct screamed surrender? The distant wevios of the pack faded into the gale, a mournful dirge that twisted her isolation into something sharper, more profound. As twilight bled into the endless night, Ilara's limbs grew heavy, the cold seeping into her bones like an insidious poison, numbing her fingers until they could scarcely grip the vial. She recalled the pack's healer's den in vivid, aching detail, the flicker of torchlight on stone walls etched with lunar runes, the earthy scent of herbs mingling with the coppery bite of blood, Thorn's labored breaths syncing with her own in the quiet vigil. He was no ordinary heir, marked by a jagged scar across his broad chest from a rite of passage gone awry. He carried the melancholy of one burdened by royal duty, his ethical core clashing with the pack's ruthless traditions. The elders had whispered of his flaws, his hesitation in battle, his unspoken guilt over a betrayal that had weakened his father's throne. Yet in her care, he had revealed a vulnerability that humanized him, making her feel, for the first time, seen beyond her outsider status. Now, alone in this frozen exile, Ilara sought refuge in a narrow cleft amid the rocks, the stone's unyielding chill offering scant comfort as she huddled against it, drawing her knees to her chest. The vial caught a stray moonbeam, glinting like a captive star, and in its reflection, she glimpsed her resolve hardening, a spark of rebellion against the pack's decree. Survival was not mere endurance. It was the first step toward reclaiming the fragments of herself they had tried to discard, the wind's howl a symphony to her unspoken vow. The storm's fury masked the snap of branches until it was too late. From the swirling shadows of the tree line emerged a colossal figure cloaked in midnight fur, his eyes gleaming like smoldering embers piercing the veil of white chaos. Thorn Blackwood's transformation ripped through him with savage intensity, the shift from wolf to man leaving him sprawled in the snow at the mouth of Alara's rocky shelter, his muscular frame convulsing as ribs realigned and fur receded into sweat-slicked skin. Rivulets of fresh blood traced crimson paths from a vicious gash along his flank, the scent sharp and visceral, cutting through the crisp pine resin and the storm's icy bite like a siren's call to her healer's instincts. Alara's breath caught in her throat, her body freezing in place as recognition dawned. This was the prince she had tended, the one whose desperate entreaties had bound her to the pack's perilous world, now reduced to a hunted fugitive. His noble lineage no shield against the pack's vengeful pursuit. Their gazes collided across the scant distance, and in that charged instant, an instinctive tether forged itself, raw and electric, born not of tender affection, but from the shared undercurrent of wounds that pulsed like a hidden vein beneath the surface. He attempted to rise, muscles bunching under taut skin marked by old scars, but agony buckled his knees, forcing a guttural growl from his lips that reverberated off the rocks like thunder trapped in a cage. "You, Alara," he rasped, the haze of pain sharpening into focus as memory pierced the fog, his voice carrying the gravelly timbre of one who had howled commands under moonlit skies. Fear coiled in her gut, a serpent urging flight into the blizzard's embrace, yet curiosity held her rooted, her mind racing through the implications. Why was the Alpha King's son here, in this forsaken corner of the wilds, bleeding out like a common prey? Her hands, trained by years of binding fractures and soothing fevers, moved almost autonomously, pressing a scrap of her cloak against the wound to stem the flow, the slick warmth of his blood seeping through her fingers and awakening the vial. At her throat. It seemed to stir, the flecked crimson within catching the faint moonlight filtering through the storm, casting erratic shadows that danced like specters on the snow. Thorn's eyes flicked to it, a flicker of profound guilt shadowing his features, the same remorse that had spilled from him in fevered confessions, tales of a past failure where his mercy had allowed a rival spy to infiltrate the pack, nearly costing his father's life. This connection repelled as fiercely as it drew. He embodied the Alpha's unyielding power, a prince of fur and fury, while she remained the fragile human, her world one of herbs and quiet vigils rather than hunts and hierarchies. The air between them thickened with unspoken tension, the wind's relentless assault mirroring the turmoil in her chest. "Why do you run from them?" she whispered, her voice threading through the gale with surprising steadiness, though her limbs trembled from the cold and the proximity of his wild aura. His response came as a bitter laugh, laced with the wet rasp of exertion and pain echoing off the shelter's walls. "Because the pack craves flawless kings, forged in fire and fang, and I am but the echo of their fractures, scarred by choices that mercy demanded." As the storm intensified, Wivios rising from the valley like a chorus of accusatory spirits, Ilara felt the pull deepen into something irrevocable, a reluctant bridge spanning the chasm of their disparate pains. The vial warmed against her chilled skin, its presence a silent arbiter of the fear and curiosity intertwining their fates. The snow around them stained with the first drops of his blood, a prelude to the trials ahead. In the cavern's shadowed depths, where torchlight danced like captive spirits on walls veined with ancient frost, they forged a fragile sanctuary from the encroaching night's merciless grasp, the air heavy with the promise of shared survival. The enemy was relentless. Scouts from a splintered rival alliance, their noses attuned to the metallic whisper of Thorn's blood carried on the gale, closing in with predatory precision under the moon's complicit glow. Ilara, drawing on fragments of lore gleaned from pack healers during her tenure, led him through a labyrinth of narrow fissures in the mountain's flank, her steps sure despite the exhaustion gnawing at her edges, the vial at her neck swaying like a pendulum marking time's fragile passage. The cavern they claimed swallowed them whole, its vaulted ceiling lost in gloom, walls etched with faded lunar symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the torch's amber flicker, the atmosphere thick with the damp mineral tang of stone undercut by the acrid smoke of the small fire she kindled from scavenged tinder. Thorn's injuries cried out for immediate attention. She worked methodically, tearing strips from her already ragged cloak to bind the gashes, her fingers deftly applying poultices of snow-melted herbs, each touch igniting unintended sparks of empathy that warmed the chill between them, though neither dared voice the shift. Hours melted into the night's unyielding vigil, the fire's crackle a rhythmic counterpoint to the wind's muffled howls beyond the entrance, allowing guarded words to unravel the barriers they had both erected. Thorn leaned against the cavern wall, his broad frame casting elongated shadows, and spoke in measured tones of his father's throne, a seat of ancient power now stained by betrayal, where a rival alpha's subtle poison had sapped the king's vitality, leaving the pack vulnerable to fractures that Thorn's own hesitations had failed to mend. Guilt carved deep lines into his face, deeper than the silvered scar across his chest, a mark from a ceremonial hunt where his ethical restraint had spared a foe, only to invite future treachery. Ilara listened, her own exile unfolding in halting confessions. The pack's visceral disdain for her human essence, viewing her as a dilution of their sacred bloodline. Yet in the quiet intimacy of his sickbed, she had glimpsed a world where tenderness could coexist with ferocity. The vial rested between her collarbones, its blood-flecked surface catching the firelight, a tangible link to the life she had preserved, now mirroring the emotional wounds they tended in tandem. As the torch flames guttered low, conversation wove deeper, revealing the contours of their isolation. Thorn's melancholy, rooted in the duty that isolated him from pack joys, Ilara's quiet strength born from years of mending others while her own heart remained untouched. Outside, the wind carried the faint, haunting wivios of distant wolves, a reminder of the hunter's proximity, yet within these walls, empathy blossomed into a tentative bond, fragile as the ice veils draping the cavern's mouth. When the first tentative light of dawn pierced the gloom, filtering through cracks like hesitant fingers, a sharper howl echoed from the slopes, signaling the pursuer's temporary withdrawal, thwarted by the storm's veil. Thorn's hand brushed hers in the dimness, a fleeting contact laden with the gravity of alliance forged in adversity, the fire's dying embers casting a warm halo on their forms. In this refuge, what had begun as reluctant shelter had transformed into the seeds of connection, the vial's subtle warmth a harbinger of vulnerabilities yet to be shared. And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The vial at her throat pulsed with an inner light, as if the moon itself had descended to claim the blood within as its eternal, luminous domain, awakening secrets long buried in the frost of denial. Deep within the cavern's nurturing embrace, as Thorn's fever finally shattered under Ilara's unceasing ministrations, cool cloths and whispered incantations blending with the rhythmic drip of melting ice, her concealed gift stirred from dormancy, unfurling like a nocturnal bloom under the moon's watchful eye. It commenced subtly, a shiver along her spine during the fire's hypnotic sway, evolving into a torrent of visions. Silver threads of fate interlacing their paths, shimmering in the air like spectral webs spun by the goddess's own hand, revealing destinies entwined beyond the veil of flesh and fur. Ilara's gasp shattered the quiet, her hands flying to clutch the necklace, fingers tracing the vial's smooth glass where Thorn's blood flecks swirled as if alive, ignited by an otherworldly essence that hummed through her veins. She was no mere mortal healer. The divine touch of the lunar deity had anointed her as a pathfinder, a rare soul attuned to the unseen currents of destiny, capable of mending not only the body's fractures, but the soul's deepest rifts, guiding lost ones through moral labyrinths to redemption's shore. Thorn roused from his fitful rest, his golden eyes snapping open to the ethereal glow enveloping her, the cavern's shadows retreating as mist coalesced around the vial, carrying whispers of ancient prophecies etched into the stone. "What manner of being are you?" he breathed, his voice a blend of reverence and the profound melancholy of dawning comprehension, rising to kneel before her despite the protest of his wounds, the fire's embers reflecting in his gaze like stars in a troubled sea. Ilara recoiled instinctively, the revelation crashing over her like an avalanche of suppressed truths. Her ability had slumbered through years of human obscurity, shunned even by her village folk who whispered of witchcraft, now erupting in this crucible of need, demanding she embrace a power that terrified as much as it empowered. The moon's pale reflection danced on a nearby pool of seepage, its light threading through the vial's crimson heart, illuminating visions of Thorn's tangled path, the guilt that shackled him like iron vines, the throne's siren call marred by betrayal's shadow, and her role as the unforeseen key to unlocking his chains. The air grew thick with the scent of smoldering herbs and ozone, the wind outside murmuring secrets through the cracks as her gift laid bare the philosophical core of their meeting. What was destiny, if not the revelation of wounds meant to be healed by unlikely hands? The fire spat a shower of sparks, ascending like prayers to the cavern's heights, while Thorn extended a tentative hand, his touch a grounding force amid the vision's dizzying whirl, calluses rough against her skin, yet tender in intent. In that suspended moment, the walls of denial began to fissure. She was the anchor he had pleaded for in his delirium, her secret a radiant beacon piercing the gloom of his self-imposed exile. Ilara met his eyes, the vial's pulse syncing with her heartbeat, a tangible emblem of the spiritual awakening that bound them, the cavern's lunar carvings seeming to glow in affirmation. Fear lingered, a cold undercurrent to the awe, but in revealing her truth, she glimpsed the first stirrings of purpose, not as the rejected outsider, but as the harbinger of redemption's light. Under the steel-gray sky, heavy with the threat of unending snow, the pack's encroaching shadows converged like a tide of judgment, forcing choices sharper than the keenest silver blade forged in lunar fires. They ventured from the cavern's protective womb into a landscape reborn in crystalline frost, the towering mountains standing as eternal sentinels cloaked in white veils, while the rival pack's vanguard materialized from the mist-shrouded tree line, their forms rippling with barely restrained fury under the moon's waning sickle. Thorn confronted the ghosts of his past in flesh and fang, the very elders who had cast Ilara into exile, now entwined in a treacherous pact with the poisoner who had struck at his father's heart, their howls a cacophony of recrimination that echoed through the valleys like thunder's prelude. "You abandoned your blood oath, Prince of Weakness!" the rival Alpha bellowed, his massive frame shifting partially to beast, eyes burning with ambition as they fixed on the scar marring Thorn's chest, a visible testament to his perceived flaws. Ilara positioned herself at his side, the vial at her neck rising and falling with her quickened breaths, its blood stirring with the awakening of her gift, a defiant talisman against the encroaching horde. The air crackled with raw tension, snowflakes spiraling in chaotic eddies like omens whispered by the wind, carrying the sharp, foreboding bite of impending violence and spilled blood. The confrontation ignited in a maelstrom of motion, claws raking through fur and flesh, fists meeting jaws with bone-jarring impacts. The snow churned into a muddy slurry beneath their feet as Thorn fought with a restraint born of deep ethical conviction, pulling strikes that rage urged him to lethal ends, his melancholy visage etched with the sorrow of necessary conflict. Ilara's Pathfinder vision surged to the fore, her eyes glazing with silver light as she discerned hidden paths through the fray, murmuring guidance that allowed Thorn to evade fatal ambushes and counter with precision, the vial glowing faintly as if channeling the moon's strategic wisdom. Yet the moral fulcrum of the battle loomed larger than any physical threat. To grant forgiveness to the traitor's venomous ambition, weaving it into the pack's fold through oaths of loyalty, or to unleash a war of extermination that would drench the mountains in rivers of blood, dooming innocents to the cycle of vengeance? Her heart fractured under the weight. Love's nascent whisper advocated for compassion's bridge, while the instinct for freedom screamed for flight from this entangled web. As Thorn grappled the rival to the ground, pinning him amid the red-streaked snow, his gaze sought hers across the chaos, the gravity of the choice suspending between them like the moon's ethereal veil, heavy with philosophical import. Blood bloomed in stark crimson petals against the pristine white, echoing the vial's eternal stain, a visceral reminder of life's fragility. In the melee's brief respite, breaths heaving and the acrid scent of sweat and iron thick in the air, Ilara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the growls like a clarion. "Mercy is the true crown of power, not the throne stained by endless retribution," she intoned, her words a philosophical bulwark amid the turmoil, drawing uncertain glances from the wavering pack members whose loyalties teetered on the edge of Thorn's example. The elders murmured, the rival's snarl faltering into wary silence, as Thorn's stand became a beacon of redemption's precarious blade. Yet the judgment hung unresolved, a spiritual precipice where distant Weavios wailed in lament for the souls balanced on the knife's edge of their impending decision, the wind-whipping flurries that blurred the line between ally and adversary. From the smoldering ashes of conflict rose a union tempered in the crucible of sacrifice, the moon ascending as solemn witness to their scars, transfigured into symbols of enduring renewal. The battle's reverberations faded into the hush of settling snow, as Thorn, with a resolve forged in the fires of his ethical soul, extended an olive branch of forgiveness to the fallen rival, binding him not with the finality of death, but with iron oaths sworn under the lunar gaze, a choice that knit the pack's splintered loyalties anew, though it exacted the toll of a throne no longer unchallenged by whispers of his mercy's cost. Ilara's gift ignited in its zenith then, a radiant conduit for the goddess's benevolent light, channeling through the vial at her throat to distill a curative essence from the blood within, its crimson depths swirling as it drew forth the lingering poison from the distant king's veins, miles away, yet linked by fate's invisible cords. Agony coursed through her like liquid fire, a visceral toll that racked her frame with shudders, her vision blurring as the spiritual transference drained her vitality. Yet in that offering, their bond solidified, not as a fleeting spark, but as an unbreakable weave of souls. Within a temple hewn from the mountain's icy heart, its arches vaulted like frozen waves under the full moon's opulent glow, they stood amidst the pack's assembled forms, the air resonant with the hush of reverence and the faint echo of dripping meltwater. The vial, now a pulsating emblem of their shared trials, hovered between them as Ilara completed the ritual, her hands trembling yet steady as she pressed it to Thorn's scar, the light bursting forth in silver rivulets that bathed the assembly in ethereal luminescence. The pack watched in stunned silence, their speech stolen by the revelation of her secret. A human bearing the goddess's mark, her pathfinder essence, not only healing the royal line, but illuminating paths to collective redemption. Sacrifice had carved the road, Ilara's hidden fortitude purging the throne's curse, Thorn's guilt alchemized into a rule of compassionate strength, where power bowed to empathy. Amid the tragedy's lingering shadows, tenderness unfurled like a rare bloom in permafrost, their love emerging as irrefutable proof of redemption's transformative grace, never a mere reward, but a hard-won testament to choice. The temple's central hearth roared to life, its golden flames licking at the chill, casting warm halos on faces carved with awe and tentative hope, while the wind beyond the sacred walls fell to a reverent whisper, carrying the soft weavios of acceptance. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. Whispers of the moon's benevolent favor lingered in the crisp, pine-scented air like silken threads woven by unseen hands, binding wounds both visible and concealed beneath layers of fur and flesh, weaving a tapestry of tentative harmony in the wake of the storm's harrowing turmoil, where every breath carried the faint, metallic aftertaste of resolved conflict. With the pack coalescing under Thorn's guidance, a leadership tempered by the unyielding forge of ethics rather than the brute imposition of an iron fist, his decisions now echoing through the mountain halls like measured howls of assurance, Ilara stepped tentatively into her emergent role as pathfinder, her visions serving as luminous guides through the lingering mists of old rivalries and unspoken grievances that still clung to the pack like frost on autumn leaves. These revelations came to her in quiet moments, often during the hush of dawn, when the first light filtered through ice-veined windows, painting the stone floors in hues of pale gold. She would close her eyes, and the vial at her throat would warm subtly, its blood-flecked bead acting as a key to unlock ethereal maps of the pack's fractured loyalties, illuminating hidden trails toward enduring peace that wound through emotional thickets of resentment and betrayal. The necklace, once a solitary talisman of her personal loss and exile, had evolved into a communal conduit for the clan's spiritual revitalization, passed reverently during council gatherings where wolves in human form gathered around roaring hearths, its crimson essence invoked in oaths that bound hearts across the ancient divides of bloodlines and grudges. Thorn's inherent melancholy, once a shroud as heavy and impenetrable as winter's thickest mantle, began to lift gradually in her steady, grounding presence, allowing flickers of warmth to pierce the gloom. Their days unfolded in long, introspective sojourns through the snow-laden forests that girded the stronghold, where the crunch of their boots on crystalline drifts mingled harmoniously with the distant, resonant wivios of patrolling sentinels, and silences stretched like sturdy bridges of understanding between sparse words filled with the shared rhythm of their breaths sinking to the wind's gentle cadence. Yet shadows of doubt encroached unbidden, slithering in during the quiet hours before sleep, when the fire's embers dimmed. Her human vulnerability, a stark, aching contrast to the pack's resilient wildness, her skin prone to chapping in the relentless cold where theirs merely thickened with fur. His royal duties a persistent specter that loomed like gathering storm clouds, testing the resilience of their nascent connection with endless demands of mediation and vigilance. The vial's subtle, persistent thrum serving as a tactile reminder of the fragility beneath their growing accord, its glass surface fogging slightly with the warmth of her pulse. One twilight eve, as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks in a blaze of crimson and indigo, casting elongated shadows across the great hall's vaulted expanse, adorned with time-worn tapestries depicting legendary lunar triumphs, their threads frayed yet vibrant in the torchlight. A subtle betrayal surfaced like an insidious crack propagating through permafrost, threatening to undermine the fragile foundations they had so painstakingly rebuilt. A young scout, once loyal in the battle's heat, had been feeding covert whispers to lingering dissenters on the fringes, echoes of the past's poisonous tendrils reaching out to sow discord anew, his motives tangled in personal slights and unrequited ambitions. Alara's gift unveiled it in a sudden cascade of silver-threaded insights during a communal feast, the air thick with the savory aromas of roasted venison and spiced mulled wine. She paused mid-conversation, her fork clattering softly against the wooden platter, as the vision pulled her into a brief, disorienting trance, navigating the scout's labyrinthine psyche through misty corridors of regret and resentment, the vial burning hot against her skin like a brand of divine insistence, amplifying the revelation until it crystallized into irrefutable clarity, the blood within swirling as if stirred by an invisible lunar tide. Thorn, alerted by her sudden pallor and the subtle glow emanating from the necklace, summoned the scout to judgment in the hall's central dais, where the assembled pack formed a semicircle of watchful eyes and twitching ears, the torch flames wavering in drafts that carried the faint, underlying scent of tension like smoke from a distant fire. He confronted the temptation of authoritarian reprisal head-on, his ethical core quivering under the onslaught of justified anger that boiled in his veins, the weight of this fresh betrayal carving fresh furrows of doubt and weariness on his brow, his fists clenching at his sides as memories of his father's poisoning resurfaced in vivid, painful flashes, the coppery taste of that near loss still haunting his dreams. Her touch, light yet anchoring like roots delving into fertile earth, steadied him amid the charged atmosphere, her fingers brushing his arm with a warmth that cut through the chill, the necklace's persistent warmth infusing her words with a tactile, almost philosophical depth. True strength resided not in the vengeful dominance of Fang and exile, but in the deliberate, courageous choice of mercy, even as old scars throbbed with the raw ache of memory's unhealed edges, her voice weaving through, the murmurs like a soothing incantation. The hearthfire's steady, hypnotic crackle underscored their mutual resolve, its flames dancing erratic shadows across the faces of the gathered wolves, some snarling in instinctive outrage, others nodding with contemplative silence, while the scent of smoldering pine logs blended with the faint, lingering trace of blood from a ceremonial cut on the scout's palm, sealing his oath of renewed fealty, creating a sensory mosaic of evolution and tentative forgiveness. In the aftermath, as the hall emptied into the starlit night, Thorn drew Alara aside into an alcove where moonlight pooled like liquid silver, their embrace a quiet reaffirmation of the bond's endurance, the vial resting between them as a silent guardian against the encroaching doubts. The northern winds, fierce as vengeful spirits unbound from ancient curses, tested the fragile peace with unrelenting gales that howled through the passes like the wails of forsaken souls, unearthing buried guilts like ancient gnarled roots clawing inexorably through the unyielding frost of forgotten winters, their tendrils seeking the light of unresolved reckonings. As winter's grip tightened into an iron vise that squeezed the life from the land, blanketing the realms in a shroud of crystalline desolation where even the hardy pines bowed under the weight of ice, a profounder peril loomed on the horizon like a gathering eclipse, a malevolent storm conjured by the arcane remnants of the rivals' sorceress allies, hidden in forgotten covens deep within the shadowed vales, its unnatural ice storms howling with an ethereal, otherworldly fury that twisted the air into razor-sharp shards, ensnaring the lands in a web of enchanted peril that threatened to shatter the hard-won unity of the pack, freezing loyalties in mid-thaw and reviving the specters of division. Ilara's visions intensified with a ferocity that left her breathless, plunging her into labyrinthine spiritual trials during the long, dark hours when the moon's light barely pierced the overcast skies. She would awaken in cold sweats, the vial clutched in her fist, as spectral adversaries manifested her deepest fears in vivid, immersive tableau. Phantom elders materializing from swirling mists to deride her human frailty with sneering howls that echoed her exile's sting, their ethereal forms circling her like predatory shades, echoes of Thorn's fevered younger self reaching out in futile, heart-wrenching pleas from the haze of his past illnesses, his boyish face contorted in pain as he begged for the nurse who had become his unwitting savior, their ghostly presences tugging at her soul with accusations of inadequacy. The vial seared against her flesh with an intensity that bordered on agony, channeling the onslaught of spiritual pain into crystalline clarity that pierced the illusions, unveiling the curse's insidious origin in a long-buried lunar betrayal from epochs past, where a forsaken priestess, spurned by an alpha's indifference, had bound tempests to her will in a ritual of blood and moonlight, her rage preserved in the vial's crimson echoes as if the necklace itself remembered the ancient slight. Thorn, ever the unyielding sentinel of duty, rallied the pack with resonant calls that carried over the gale's roar, his voice a steady anchor amid the chaos as he organized defenses. Scouts dispatched to probe the storm's edges, warriors fortifying the stronghold's icy battlements with sharpened stakes and woven barriers. Yet his ethical foundation trembled visibly under the deluge of unrelenting assault, the specter of irreplaceable loss etching profound sorrow into his features, deepening the lines around his golden eyes and making the scar on his chest ache as if freshly reopened by invisible claws, his nights haunted by visions of Alara lost to the frost's embrace. In a secluded forest clearing, ringed by sentinel pines bowed low under the snow's merciless burden, their branches creaking like weary bones in the wind's symphony, they confronted the storm's pulsating core at the ritual's climax, the air alive with the crackle of arcane energy that raised the hairs on their arms and the sharp, stinging bite of frozen needles that drew pinpricks of blood from exposed skin. Ilara's Pathfinder essence intertwined seamlessly with Thorn's unyielding physical prowess, their union manifesting as a visceral, almost tangible symphony of shared power. Her hand clasped firmly in his, calluses meeting soft palm in a grip that transmitted pulses of determination, a deliberate cut made with a ritual dagger on her palm, mingling her warm blood with his upon the vial's surface, the glass warming instantly as the mingled crimson ignited a cataclysmic burst of silver radiance that erupted outward like a solar flare contained in lunar bounds, piercing the tempest's roiling heart with beams that shattered the enchanted ice in a deafening cascade of fracturing crystals and liberated winds that whipped through the clearing in a whirlwind of release. Triumphant weevios erupted from the throats of the assembled pack, hidden in the tree line, a choral celebration that drowned the storm's dying wails in a wave of primal unity, the sound reverberating through the mountains like a declaration of defiance against the old magics. But the trial demanded its merciless price, exacting a toll that transcended the physical. Ilara crumpled to the snow-dusted earth, her body convulsed by the spiritual exsanguination that drained her vitality like moonlight bleeding into the void, her vision tunneling to black spots as waves of exhaustion crashed over her, every muscle screaming in protest while the vial's glow faded to a feeble ember against her heaving chest. This collapse compelled Thorn to the ultimate crossroads of his soul, his arms scooping her up with desperate tenderness amid the settling flurries. Embrace the path of redemption through her sacrificial healing, binding his fate ever more tightly to the pack's throne and its burdens, or seize the elusive freedom from those inexorable chains, fleeing into anonymity with her, into the wilds where no duties could pursue. Compassion's insistent call prevailed over despair's seductive lure, drowning out the whispers of escape as he cradled her against his chest, his heartbeat a thunderous drum against her ear, their embrace a redemptive lodestar amid the cold's encroaching void that still nipped at the edges of their victory, the wind gradually softening to a murmur as if the goddess herself exhaled in approval, the mingled blood on the vial drying into a permanent seal of their trial's endurance. Under the eternal moon's compassionate vigil, its silver orb hanging like a benevolent eye in the velvet expanse of the night sky, rejection's forged chains, cold and unyielding as mountain iron, dissolved into destiny's warm, enveloping embrace, birthing a renaissance etched indelibly in the starlit expanse of snow-swept eternity, where every flake bore witness to the transformation of pain into purpose. The storm's vanquishment heralded the dawn of a transformed epoch, a new chapter unfolding with the slow melt of spring's first whispers. Thorn ascended to the Alpha King's mantle with solemn grace and unshakable resolve, restoring his father's throne through the unassailable potency of Ilara's gift, which had not only purged the venom's lingering tendrils from the royal bloodline, but fortified it against future shadows with wards of lunar light woven into the vial's essence, ensuring the Pack's legacy endured beyond the frailties of flesh. Ceremonies marked the transition in the castle's grand lunar temple, where incense of sage and moonbloom filled the air with a heady, purifying scent, and the pack gathered in a sea of fur-trimmed cloaks and gleaming eyes, their howls rising in harmonious acclaim as Thorn placed the crown, a circlet of silver wolf's teeth and etched moonstone, upon his brow, his father's frail hand trembling in blessing. The pack, once rendered utterly speechless by the dramatic unveiling of her arcane secret during the battle's revelations, now exalted her as the vital, beating human core of their lunar heritage, integrating her into rituals with chants that invoked the Pathfinder's name, the vial enshrined as a hallowed relic in a niche of the temple's altar, its blood-flecked essence invoked in every ceremony of communal unity, from mating rites under the full moon to initiations of young wolves, passed hand to hand as a symbol of bridging worlds, its glass polished to a perpetual shine that caught the light like captured starfire. Their love, germinated from the resisted embers of initial encounters and kindled to roaring life by the moral infernos of trials and choices, stood as the paramount emblem of redemption, a profound, deliberate choice navigated through the thorns of suffering's unrelenting garden, eschewing the illusions of immediate bliss or unearned bounty for the authentic, hard-forged proof of souls aligned in unbreakable purpose, their touches now lingering with the depth of shared survivals, conversations, laced with philosophical reflections on mercy's quiet power. Within the castle's soaring spires of glacial stone, carved with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight, they stood side by side on a balcony overlooking the vast, white wilderness that stretched to the horizon. The hearthfire's golden warmth from the adjoining chamber, a defiant contrast to the boundless chill beyond, its flames crackling softly as if applauding their journey. Thorn's scar, once a badge of solitary guilt, and her necklace entwined as twin symbols of wounds transmuted into wisdom. The cord now reinforced with silver thread gifted by the pack's artisans, the vial resting nestled in the hollow of her throat like a second heart. As the moon swelled to its majestic fullness once more, bathing the halls and forests in a silver benediction that turned snow to shimmering diamonds, Ilara attuned to the goddess's subtle, resonant murmur during a solitary vigil in the temple, the air still and expectant. Every spirit akin to an omega, cloaked even in the unassuming guise of humanity, emerged destined to suture the fractures of an alpha's burdened heart, turning the sting of exile into the exaltation of shared sovereignty. Her visions confirming the pack's future paths, branching toward prosperity under their joint guidance. Thorn's gaze, no longer veiled in the heavy melancholy that had shadowed his days, met hers across the balustrade with a luminosity born of their collective trials, alight with the quiet, enduring fire of mutual purpose and unbreakable trust. His hand finding hers in the chill air, fingers interlacing with a familiarity forged in fire and frost. The wind, softened to a gentle caress that rustled the banners of the realm, bore the melodic weavios of the pack in a harmonious symphony from the valleys below, a ode to rebirth's triumphant cadence that swelled and faded like a living breath, while the blood within the vial settled into serene repose at last, its crimson hue an everlasting testament to love's redemptive endurance, a flame that time, tempest, or treachery could never hope to extinguish, burning eternal in the heart of their united legacy. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.